Oh, well, that was it. Christmas 2014, been and gone. I hope it was wonderful. It was over fairly quickly, I have to say. Mind you, maybe that's because I slept for part of the day. But the Christmas tree's still up. No presents underneath it now. The turkey's gone. Some might say, thankfully, the visitors have gone. It's done. Christmas has been and gone and done. Life is not exactly back to normal, but for many people, it's pretty close. It's only teachers who have loads of time off at this time of the year. Yes, okay, I'll take that back. but for people, they're still working. Things are still going on as they always do. We've spent weeks, if not even months, planning and preparing and getting organised for Christmas time and for the events, certainly events in church over that time. We've been through Advent, we've sung the carols, we've told the stories, we've done all that, and very soon the Easter eggs will be in the shops. Because the world just keeps going. There's money to be made, things to be bought and sold, and we don't want to stop for something as trivial as Christmas. Harrods had their Christmas decorations in the shop in August. The English children weren't even back from their holidays in the summer, and the Christmas decorations were in. So 6 months more and you can buy your Christmas decorations. We're not quite ready yet, though, to leave the Christmas story. But today we're going to look at the bit that we sometimes just kind of gloss over and that we forget. Quite correctly, our thinking is focused on Jesus, because after all, that's the point. He is the reason for the whole story. We often include Mary and the shepherds and the wise men. Joseph's just kind of tagged on the end there. Mary and Joseph did this. But nobody really speaks about Joseph or what it was like for him. And in fact, the Bible doesn't record anything that Joseph ever said. Is that not typical? If you're a husband, nobody really cares. Nobody listens to you anyway. Poor Joseph is kind of stuck there. In fact, after the story in Luke chapter 2, where they go to Jerusalem to the temple, and they're going home and suddenly discover that he's not with them, and they have to go back and they find him in the temple with the teachers. After that incident, you never hear of Joseph again. Nobody really knows what happened to him, but at some point between there and the start of Jesus' ministry, something has happened. We don't know what. Most people think that he died in that time, but we don't know. He was so insignificant, if you like, to the rest of the story that it's not actually recorded. This whole section of Jesus' life is not really thought to be that important by the writers of the Gospels. They don't really record very much information about it. Luke sums up 12 years in 2 verses. In chapter 2, verses 39 and 40, he says this: when Joseph and Mary had done everything required by the law of the Lord, they returned to Galilee, to their hometown of Nazareth, and the child grew and became strong. He was filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was on him. Thank you very much. That's all you need to know. He grew up, and he was full of grace. Well, it is good to know that. There's no question about that. But, I would have liked a wee bit more information. But that's all that's required. You see, Luke and Matthew record different events. They're writing for different audiences. Luke is writing for a Gentile audience who wouldn't get the references that Matthew gives to ancient prophecy. It doesn't matter to them. They don't really care one way or another, because his audience is different. But they would understand Jesus wanting to be in the place of learning, to be with the leaders and the teachers. They would get that. So that's why Luke includes it. But Matthew, he's writing to a Jewish audience. And so he's realizing that for them, the important bit is that this was a fulfillment of prophecy. And so he includes all that in this bit of the story. And so for them, that's really important. So Jesus has been born. The shepherds have been to visit. The wise men have come with their gifts, and at some point, fairly soon after that, Joseph has this dream that he's to get up and he's to go to Egypt. It's not the first dream that Joseph has had, and it's not the last dream that Joseph has. It seems that he was open to God speaking to him in that particular way. So anyway, the angel comes and he tells Joseph in this dream that he's got to flee to Egypt to protect Jesus because Herod is going to try and kill him. I want to look at some of the things that we can learn from this story. The first thing, I think perhaps the most important thing, is that Joseph was obedient. He gets this message from God, and he doesn't waste any time. He didn't wait until morning. He didn't look for plan B. He got up, and during the night, he got them gathered together, and they left, because that's what he had been told to do. When Mary and Joseph had travelled down into Bethlehem, they had only been expecting to be a few days. Now, you know what it's like when you go even for a few days. Some of us take a tiny wee bag. Some of us take a great big bag. But you don't take your whole stuff because you're only expecting to be a day or two. So they've left their family. They've left the house. They've left all his carpenter's tools. They've left all of that because they didn't expect to be that long. And yet here they are now, heading in the opposite direction entirely. They're heading down into Egypt, away from everything they knew. It wasn't safe to travel at night. So the fact that Joseph would do that shows that he's prepared to trust God even when he knows it's not really safe. But God's told him, and so he's going to do it anyway. You couldn't really see where you were going, obviously, because there were no street lights and there weren't paved roads. So it would be easy to slip and to fall and to twist your leg or something. But not only that, the roads were often a place where robbers would go because it's easy prey for them. They could attack you and take your belongings, and there was no police car there to come and chase them or anything like that. So it wasn't really safe. But Joseph was told to go, and he did. He didn't look for plan B. He didn't wait for a better time. He didn't do any of that stuff. He simply obeyed. And then we see that God provided. So we said they haven't brought the stuff with them that they need to go and live in Egypt. But well, wouldn't you know, 3 wise men came. And what did they bring with them? Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Well, you can sell the frankincense and myrrh, spices that can be used, fragrance that can be used. And you've got gold. Well, there's a thing. Would you have enough money to live should you happen to need a wee trip to Egypt? Yes, you would. Why? Because when God calls you to do something, he also provides the means for you to do it. God's not going to ask you to do something and then leave you on your own, struggling away with something. God is going to provide what you need, when you need it, for whatever it is that he's called you to do. So then we see that Herod was angry. Now Herod, this is the bit that we usually miss out of this story, because it's really rather unpleasant. Mary and Joseph and the baby are running for their lives down into Egypt. Herod ruled as governor in the north in Galilee from 47 to 37 BC. And then he was promoted to be ruler of the whole area. He was famous for building cities and fortresses and temples, many of which are around today. You can still go, and I mean, some of the stuff that he did was brilliant. The engineering and all of that was fantastic. If you ever get the opportunity, I would encourage you to go. It's great. However, as well as all of that stuff, and in some ways he was quite popular because he provided employment and lots of money and lots of income and trade and all of that kind of stuff. However, he was an incredibly cruel person. He was very vicious, and he was obsessed with the kind of internal politics of his family. His sister was also a bit ruthless, I don't know whether it was that she wanted her son to take his place or whatever it was, but she persuaded Herod that his favourite wife, because he had a number, but his favourite wife, Mariamne, was plotting against him. So Herod had her and their 2 sons, her brother, her grandfather, and her mother murdered. So what's another few Jewish babies? Just somebody like that. All he cared about was protecting his position. So the slaughter of the children in Bethlehem was a fulfillment of the prophecy of Jeremiah. In Jeremiah 31 and 15 it says, as we read, "This is what the Lord says, a voice is heard in Ramah, mourning and great weeping. Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they're no more." Well, what does that really mean? What's the significance of the names there? Well, Rachel, it was Jacob's wife, and she was buried in Bethlehem, which is a few miles south of Jerusalem. Ramah is a few miles north of Jerusalem. It's almost as if you've taken a kind of circle with Jerusalem at the middle and drawn it around these 2 cities. And that's the area that all of the children, all of the male children under 2, are going to be killed. And so, understandably, there's weeping and wailing. Just before he died, Herod got 1 male member of each of the wealthy Jewish families and gathered them all together and instructed that when he died, they should all be slaughtered so that there would be genuine weeping and wailing when he died. He wasn't a very nice person. I think it's fairly safe to say. He certainly wouldn't be worried in any way about killing a few Jews. But then we also see that in the middle of all that, God has a plan. Hosea chapter 11 verse 1 says, "Out of Egypt I called my son." God, all those years before this happened, prophesied that that was going to happen. Egypt was also under Roman rule, but Herod had no power or authority there, so they would be safe. There were already Jewish communities in Egypt. In fact, they often consisted of people who had fled Herod's rule. And so they had set up in Egypt. So that country that once had been the place where they were slaves and they were held captive now becomes the place where they're safe. And in fact, they're thriving. So God had a plan. Eventually, Herod died. And Joseph has the other dreams about heading back to Israel and then up to Nazareth, and that's in fact what they do. And that also fulfilled prophecies in the Old Testament, Isaiah chapter 11, and then in chapter 53. But Nazareth was a small town. In fact, it was famous for not being famous. No one really heard of Nazareth. It's not even mentioned in the Old Testament. It's one of those places that's been bypassed. You know, it's like Irvine. It's been bypassed. You know, you go into it if you really have to, but otherwise you use the bypass. You go around it. That was Nazareth. It was bypassed. The main trade routes, north and south and east and west, were nearby, but not through the village. It was so insignificant that in John chapter 1, verse 46, Nathanael says, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" That's what people then thought about it. And yet, that's where God planned for his son to grow up. It was in that environment, seeing the caravans going to and fro with the trade, maybe even mending the odd wheel, but seeing the Gentiles come and go, it was in that place, out of the way place, that Jesus grew up. I think there's something in the plans of God that likes the insignificant. Jesus, we're told in Philippians, made himself lower than a servant, He made himself insignificant so that he could do something remarkable in the world. He was born with the animals. There's something about God that likes taking things that the world looks at and thinks are worthless and useless and making them into something absolutely amazing. What he's looking for is a heart like Joseph's, a heart that's obedient, a heart that hears him speak and says, yes, Lord. A heart like Mary's, who when the angel came to her and said, you're going to have this baby, she said, yes, Lord. Two people that nobody had ever heard of become central in the story of salvation. And maybe you're sitting here today and you're thinking, there's something about me that's insignificant. Nobody really knows who I am. Nobody really cares what I'm like. Nobody really listens. There's nobody. I'm on my own. And maybe you feel that you've been kind of left behind or looked over or whatever it is. But I want to tell you that God loves people whose hearts are obedient, who don't think too much of themselves. And he loves taking people and saying, you know what? I can work with you. I can work in you and I can work through you if you'll let me. And I've got real plans for you, plans to prosper you and plans for your good and plans for your future. Will you trust me? Will you come with me? So what do we learn from all of this? Well, the first thing we learn is that the safest place to be is where God leads you. The best, the safest place to be is where God leads you. The wise men followed a star and it led them to Jesus. The wise men followed God's instructions and they escaped from Herod. Joseph followed the angel's instructions in a dream and he escaped to Egypt, and then he followed the instructions and he came home. The safest place for us to be is in the center of God's will and plan for us, because God knows where it will lead. How much better to follow his path than our own. Second thing is that Christians are not exempt from trouble. Look at all the things that happened in this first Christmas story. The wise men had to avoid the anger and the wrath of Herod. Mary and Joseph had to flee for their life. All these innocent babies being slaughtered. God's people are not exempt from trouble. But what we understand is that in the midst of the darkness, his light shines. In the midst of the difficulty, he walks with us in it and through it. Because the third thing is that he is in control. We can be at peace when we are living in God's will. It's not that bad things won't happen to us. They might, and they often do. But we know that God has a plan for us, and he will work things out. Everything that happened in the Christmas story was planned by God. We see it again and again and again through the story when we read it. It's just a reminder that God is in control. He has a plan and a purpose for good. Joseph and Mary experienced God's plan. But what would they think then when the child's been born and all of a sudden they find themselves in Egypt? They didn't have their baby and then live happily ever after. Mary had to go through so much more even when Jesus started his ministry. Their life was nothing like they had planned or prepared for. And maybe you're experiencing that too. Maybe your Christmas wasn't all you had expected or planned for. And now that Christmas is over and the excitement is past, Maybe your bubble has burst and you're wondering, what was it all about? What was it about? Why did we put all that time and effort and energy into that lasted a day? Well, guess what? God is still in charge. God is still in control. He didn't leave Mary and Joseph to do their own thing and go their own way. He led them, he guided them, he provided for them. And he'll do the same for us if we trust him. God is still on the throne. God is still in control. And his light still shines in the darkness.